My guest today is Neil Sanders. Neil holds an MA in Film Studies, and he also has earned a BA in Psychology and Media Production. He's an expert in the subject of mind control and has devoted years to its political application and military application by governments, intelligence agencies, and various corporations. Neil is also the author of Your Thoughts Are Not Your Own, Volume 1 and Volume 2. Neil, anything you want to add to that intro?
No, that's very nice, a very kind and flattering intro. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. And listen, he's also done several interviews you can see on the web to get a fuller grasp of this topic before you delve into his books, which are certainly worth a read. Volume 1 and Volume 2, Your Thoughts Not Your Own, Volume 1. Can you give us a brief rundown on what that's about?
Yeah, sure. I mean, essentially, it's what we would term mind control, but it's the personal application of mind control. For want of a better phrase, it's if anyone's seen the film The Manchurian Candidate, it's hypnotically or by other means taking control of a person. Basically, mind control. It is reality, and it was investigated by numerous entities, various militaries and intelligence agencies. And it started off with the search for truth serums, or alternatively wiping people's minds or causing amnesic barriers so that they couldn't possibly spill the beans in an interrogation scenario. And from there, it basically expanded into control of actions, emotions, through various means, through drugging, through hypnosis, through the application of certain what would be later called psychotronic implants or radio waves, microwaves, that sort of thing. And so the first book talks about that, sort of the declassified documents, the nuts and bolts, if you like, of the military and intelligence agencies' applications of this thing. And just to show that it is actually real, because it's one of those things that sort of a lot of people would think it falls into the realm of science fiction, and it certainly is out there, but the documentation and the sort of interviews with doctors involved and various apologies from presidential boards and stuff like that show that not only was it real, but actually it was very, very highly tuned and quite effective.
Its origins, mind control. You mentioned the Tavistock Institute. That was a organization that was established after World War One. What was its purposes?
Well, I mean, initially it was the Tavistock Clinic, and then again, like all of these things, it sort of expanded. Initially, it was a chap called Hugh Crichton Miller, and it was supposedly to treat soldiers that were returning from the First World War with shell shock, or what would now be called post-traumatic stress disorder. But if you sort of actually look at the results of the experimentation and the like, it would appear that actually they were more interested in what the effects of breaking the psyche of man was, and how effectively and what the results were. There were certain experiments that involved getting people out of catatonic states and stuff like that, like injecting them with large doses of amphetamines and such. But bizarrely, these experiments were then later taken, about 20 years later, taken and used by people in the American military and the CIA and various places like that as ways of actually encouraging people to expose themselves and basically as a truth serum. It didn't actually work, but it was one of the experiments that was that came out of then. And basically from there, the Tavistock Institute expanded under the directorship of a chap called John Rawlings Rees. And basically what they felt was that society needs to be controlled by like an elite group at the top, because basically the majority of people are like a braying herd. They really can't and shouldn't be making decisions. And so the best way to control people is to spread this ethos of what is right in society, and often to do this by the use of fear. And so what John Rawlings Rees did was he sent out a group of psychiatrists and psychologists to various institutions around the world, and he called them shock troops. Now, the function of the shock troop was basically to spread the Tavistock ethos. What was the Tavistock ethos? The Tavistock ethos, best explained by Kurt Lewin, who was a of it, was to provide trauma on a widespread basis to society at large, so that it basically reduces their reasoning capacity, gets them in a state of fight or flight, reduces their reasoning capacity to that of a child, and by that, therefore, people from an exterior point can impose their view and direct society. And this exterior point would basically be authority figures that the idea would be they create some sort of crisis or the perception of some sort of crisis. The public panics and runs to the authority of the government or whatever and says, please, please protect us from this crisis.
So basically what you're saying with Tavistock, what they observed was, particularly with the battlefield experience of so many young men, the shell shock, the trauma of battle, the carnage that they witnessed caused sort of a breakdown.
Yeah, absolutely.
A trauma-based breakdown. And Tavistock, instead of really treating it, they sort of weaponized it.
Kind of, yeah. What they noticed was that it's like an overload of the senses. There's just too much going on. And bizarrely, there was a book that came out by Alvin Toffler called Future Shock, and in this he basically talked about society breaking down because technology was moving far too fast. Now, apparently this was a work of fiction, but it completely paralleled the Tavistock idea of imposing all this sort of over-sensory overload, basically, in order to just make it just smashes people's psyches. Far too much for them to take in, and if particularly it's a traumatic experience, as you say, that's even more difficult for the human brain to cope with. And it works on defense mechanisms. I mean, when somebody goes into a state of post-traumatic stress disorder or that sort of thing, it's your brain trying to make sense of a horrible, horrible incident and trying in a way to protect you from it, but it's basically not functioning correctly. And so by the manipulation of these sort of scientific principles and these psychological principles and the determinings of their experiments, this is basically what they did. I mean, Eric Trist, who was in the 60s, was the director of Tavistock. He said that the function of Tavistock was to create social turbulence, which was basically trauma coming from all angles, so that people wouldn't know what to do with themselves and wouldn't basically be able to function without being told what to do. And in the mid-60s, he proudly professed to a press conference that thanks to the work of Tavistock and the shock troops, that this state of social turbulence was now permanent and irreversible. And this was in the 60s. I mean, the other thing that they do is they entrain blue chip corporations and politicians how to be better and more efficient blue chip corporations and politicians. They do it authority entraining for political parties, and they also are involved with companies like Unilever and BP and various military and social control elements like the police force and that sort of thing, but also they were sort of intricate in the founding of like MIT, Stanford Research Institute, the Rand Corporation, National Institute of Mental Health, the Esalen Corporation, Wharton School of Economics, that sort of thing. So incredibly prestigious think tanks and institutions that then set policy, that then dictate norms throughout society, and so it basically spreads out like a web.
So basically, so you have this a phenomenon observed by various people within the British establishment after the war, and I guess the coming of World War II and the aftermath of World War II. And the Cold War and the establishment of the National Security State in 1947, at least its formal establishment with the Central Intelligence Agency. You have the Korean War, which some would say was a concocted crisis to justify the National Security State. There are various provocations or setups that were done during World War II and after the war, funding Ho Chi Minh and funding the North Koreans and starting a crisis. But then the excuse for America's at least the Central Intelligence Agency's experiment in these things was the Korean War. Yeah. Although we have documents that suggest that the experimentation began before the Korean War.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the British were obviously doing stuff in the Second World War and prior to that. One of the cases was the drugging of Eli Hagar by Major Alexander Kennedy in Egypt, and basically after the war, it came out that he was a psychological interrogation expert, which is euphemistic for mind control, truth serums, and that sort of thing. Chatter, which was basically the use of mescaline and other components to to elicit, again, a sort of truth serum response, which was an Office of Naval Intelligence operation. That started in 1947. I mean, even sort of Bluebird, which was the first sort of Central Intelligence Agency foray into mind control, which was April the 20th, 1951, even that predates the Korean War. So we can see that basically it was an excuse. It wasn't it's an easily disprovable excuse. Basically, they were already going into that. And what happened was basically a lot of soldiers started saying publicly that they were denouncing the American regime and they wanted to stay in communist Korea, and that communism was the way forward, and that furthermore that they'd been illegally using aerosolized anthrax on the civilian population. And there is a lot of sort of discrepancy about this, but the obviously the excuse was that, well, this is outrageous. These are obviously lies. These poor GIs or whatever are being sort of manipulated in order to say this. Now, there's a certain amount of evidence that basically they were encouraged to say this for whatever reason, because basically it transpires that they very probably were illegally spraying certain areas of Korea with anthrax. I don't quite understand it. I assume it's basically, admit it, no one's going to believe it anyway. It doesn't matter if we lie and we get caught in a lie. It's difficult. If we admit it, then basically we can just say that they're brainwashed or whatever. Nobody's really going to pay any attention anyway because they're the enemy. So, but you're quite right. It was set up in order to basically, we need to get involved in mind control because the communists who are our mortal enemy, they're already like sort of entrenched in this science. I mean, there's a certain amount of evidence as well that the Nazis were also experimenting, certainly with the breaking of men's will and truth serums at places like Dachau and Auschwitz and stuff like that. There's even a certain suggestion that the experiments of people like Joseph Mengele, which produced results of trauma bonding, which is essentially, it's not dissimilar to the concept of like how a pimp would control a prostitute, basically through fear and destruction of the ego. And so that sort of thing was going on at Auschwitz, apparently. So the actual start of it is, again, it's a bit of a mystery. It would appear that everybody was sort of dabbling or dipping their toes into the field. I mean, there's certain people that would say that if certain passages within the Egyptian Book of the Dead could be construed as using potions or powders or various concoctions and the use of mantras and what could be termed sort of hypnotic type speech patterns in order to create slaves. Obviously, we've got stories of like Haitian voodoo and the creation of what would be called a zombie and stuff like that. Dr. Caligari's cabinet, that's obviously it's a work of fiction, but these ideas don't come from nowhere. So it is a bit of a mystery from what we can see, basically. As the British, the Americans, and the Russians were all, and the Germans were all involved in various stages of mind control. But as I say, I mean, it's all steeped in mystery. It wasn't until sort of 1977 that a few documents pertaining to MK Ultra, which was the CIA mind control program, came out due to the Church Committee, which basically investigations. I mean, that was in 1975, and then basically in 1977 there was a Senate hearing, and the majority of documents were destroyed, were purposely destroyed, but some were sort of they were labelled in I think it was that they were labelled to go through financial records or something. So there was we got a glimpse of 149 projects that pertain to sort of every aspect of personal and social mind control, using machinery, using hypnosis, using drugs, using coercive methods and societal methods and that sort of thing. But I'd suggest that this was just the tip of the iceberg. So again, it's a bit of a mystery. You can piece bits together here and there, but a total history of mind control is just not available, basically.
And of course, the writings of Aldous Huxley, Brave New World, and even
1984.
George Orwell, that suggests trauma-based, even chemical, drug-based mind control. So this dates back to the 30s and 40s, long before.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was the Hungarian trial of Mendelsky, and the book that everyone claimed that, I forget whether it's Brave New World or 1984, was based, which is which is like a sort of it's more like Brave New World. It's more to do with like mathematics and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So these ideas were out there. I mean, obviously Orwell basically claimed that 1984 was about the horrors of communism. But whether that's true or whether he had slightly more insight, it is again debated. Do you know what I mean? Like same thing with Aldous Huxley. I mean, Aldous Huxley was making speeches to the Tavistock Institute or for the Tavistock Institute in Berkeley, where he was basically, whether he's advocating it or whether he's just saying that this would work, but it's the very famous speech about a scientific dictatorship. There's no way that it should fail, because you can basically train people to love their servitude and to honor their dictator almost. And this is true. I mean, people will put up with an incredible amount of rubbish for easy but repetitive and regular pleasure. Like, that I get the impression that's why the working week is so successful, because you've always got the weekend to look forward to. But basically then what they do is they fill your weekend with stuff like the football or whatever. Do you know what I mean? So
everybody's working for the weekend, right? As the song went.
Yeah, absolutely. But then at the weekend, basically, you just tend to go into sort of collectivization and stuff like that. I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, but there's an argument that when you're not at work and you're not asleep, then that's the time when you could be sort of examining your lot in life and going, hang on, this isn't fair, really, is it? So we've got to fill your time with either stuff, buying stuff, it's improving your home, DIY, whatever, golf, getting you into a sort of following a team, anything like that.
And was it Aldous Huxley who wrote about the construction of large sports stadiums and sports teams?
I think it was. I always forget who this was. I think it was. I can't remember. It was
Julian, his brother.
I'm not sure. I think it was a science fiction writer, I believe.
Okay.
I was. So it wasn't Jules Verne, but Victor Hugo, maybe. I can't remember. No, okay. I don't think so. I don't think that's right.
He's 19th century,
Yeah, absolutely. But basically, there was a book in which basically suggested that sports teams were, people would dress up in uniforms and everyone would get behind these teams and such like that. I mean, there is certainly. I mean, sport until it was made professional was the purview of children. It was to be done at school and such like that.
Yep.
And then it became bigger and bigger, and again there are debates as to why this is, the money aspects of it or stuff like that, but it certainly does provide an incredible amount. I mean, I'll put it this way, in England I'm not a big fan of football or soccer, but it's on every night. You can find a game on every single night in England, like, if you want to watch it. And I know this because everybody at work tells me about it. So, again, I'm not so fussed, but it's there. Well,
it's a huge distraction. It's breads and circuses. It's a strategy of parents.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And I've noticed that's the same thing over here in the United States, where you have entire networks dedicated to it. And
I think it's interesting you have Monday night football.
Yeah, because, now we have Thursday night football and Sunday night football.
Right, okay.
And
I just thought with the Monday thing, it's like first day back at work. It's like, oh my god, this is awful. I can't be. Football tonight. Oh, sweet.
Yep. And it's a huge distraction, and it is. It used to be something that kids would enjoy. When I was a younger person, I got into sports. I liked baseball, and as I got older, I got less interested because there are other things to be concerned with, and there are other things really to take up your time. And what you have today now, at least in the United States, is you've a lot of cuckolded and men who have very little control over their destiny, who seek vicarious masculinity through the playing fields.
That's exactly what I was going to say, because I mean, certainly with football, with soccer, your career is done by the time you're 30. Like it's a young man's game basically, and so it's also incredibly difficult to get into a professional level. There's something ridiculous. We have academies basically where like a club will take a load of sort of like very young kids and at a very young age and be training them up with a view to fast tracking them into the professional game and such like that. And it transpires that something like 80% of players that go through that don't get don't make it in any level of professional sport. So yeah, I mean that I think that sort of goes towards the sort of the lionization of sports players as well. The over zealous lionization of them as well. Do you know what I mean? They're literally they're heroes, and the huge amount of money. No one seems to go, that's ludicrous. Like 120 million pounds a year. That could solve a country's debt problem. Like, you know, that's ridiculous. Like
they're modern day gladiators.
Well, absolutely they are. And it's interesting that you mentioned gladiators. One of the things that people don't realise is that gladiators were sponsored by I think what's he called you know the film Gladiator, Maxim, I forget his name, but he was based on a real character, and as far as I'm aware he was sponsored by an olive oil company.
Not the Corleone, no.
But Genko, no, not that one. But you know, it's something similar, maybe. Who knows? Like a distant precursor of it, perhaps. But
well, they said if you want to understand the real waterworks, you got to watch The Godfather, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. You know, I mean, obviously, aside from the entertainment story, I'm assuming everybody knows this, but the Johnny Fontaine character in The Godfather is a direct. It's a direct story about Frank Sinatra.
Yeah, from here to eternity and all that, yeah.
And to the Tommy Dorsey contract, you know, that's the offer that he couldn't refuse. He was with the big band leader. And also, basically, the Sinatra family came from the same village as the Luciano family.
Oh, Lucky Luciano.
Yeah, absolutely.
Of course, and his career is a great illustration of the nexus between intelligence, governments, and drugs and organized crime.
Well, Sam Giancana and Luciano were obviously, and Trafficante were all friends with Sinatra, but they were also all tied into the sort of the Cuba thing. It was I've forgotten his name. The guy that ran Vegas. Basically, he was the guy that was approached to
Lansky.
No, not Meyer Lansky. Oh, he's the guy that ran all the ice things. I've gone completely simple, but basically he was the guy that was connected to the CIA got him in to try and assassinate Fidel Castro, and basically it all went wrong. But he was the guy that was responsible for.
The guy in New Orleans.
Oh, he was in. He'll come to me. I'm just sort of trying to go through my presentation, see if I can actually find it. No, can't find it.
Bobby Kennedy deported in '62 or something.
Give me 2 seconds. I'll find. No, it's totally gone. But it was the guy that basically was the founder for Sinatra's career, and this is the overlap between the CIA, and the mafia and stuff like that. I can see his face. I can't for the life of me.
Trafficante?
No, it wasn't Trafficante. Hang on, give me 2 seconds. Let me try and find this guy, because this is going to irritate me otherwise.
I know it does. When you get a name and you know the name and.
It's something like, I mean, he was friends with the Fischetti brothers, but it's something like Visconti or something like that, and I can't for the life of me remember it. That's really going to annoy me.
Not Valachi, the Valachi papers and all that.
No, but here's an interesting thing about the Valachi papers, and the commission report, basically. The people that were involved in the Valachi papers, one of them was Bobby Kennedy, and basically, obviously, Sam Giancana was behind Jack Kennedy's ascension to power, because he basically fixed the ballot in Chicago. So I always wondered about that, whether, although he appeared to be wanting to smash the mafia and stuff like that, he certainly covered up for Frank Sinatra's involvement. And I wonder if it was more of a damage control thing, also setting up the mafia as this entity that basically, look, this is what organised crime is. Certainly nothing to do with the intelligence agencies or anything like that. No, it's nothing like that. I just think that's... Then the second one, the commission report, was, as far as I can tell, it was Giuliani that was involved in that, and Giuliani was, very, very mafiaed up. So, I'm very, very suspicious about that sort of that sort of. Hang on, here we go. This is.
You can't get that name.
I think so. I'm just going to try and find it.
Not Johnny Roselli, is it?
Yes!
There you go.
Yes.
Vegas, because he's the one they found cut up in Miami Bay during the...
Exactly, that's the one, yeah. And,
Johnny Roselli, yeah.
Johnny Roselli, that's done. He was responsible for... He was the person that basically made the offer that they couldn't refuse. And then was later involved in trying to assassinate Fidel Castro, and basically... So
there you go. Johnny Roselli. I had that name. There you go.
Thank you for that. That was going to drive me absolutely mad.
Because both him and Sam Giancana were killed right around the time of the House subcommittee hearings on the assassinations.
Well, this is what I mean. Do you know what I mean? Like, and so I wonder if any of these sort of public exposés are in actual fact really sort of damage control limitations. You know, look at the left hand and you won't see what the right hand's doing. And in a similar way to the sort of Frost-Nixon interview, where everybody, yes, we've got one over on the evil president. See, democracy does work. Yeah. And then you find out that basically it was all, it's a publicity exercise to elicit sympathy for Nixon. It was all scripted by... This is the same thing. We've started having political debates in England, with the people, the candidates or whatever, or they'll get there and they'll answer questions. Like, people really take notice of it. And as far as I'm aware, all the political debates in America, they're all scripted. Like, or scripted to a very large degree, and all the questions are pre-vetted and such like that. So I very much doubt that it's any different in England.
Well, back to sports, the analogy, it's like professional wrestling. It's two sides punch it out, then after they get behind scenes, they shake hands and they make deals, they sleep together, and it's no...
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also that sort of cult of personality rather than an actual sort of, there's an idea behind political parties. There's an idea that you associate with. Politicians aren't there to actually change anything. They're there to sort of, keep a steady hand on the tiller.
And of course, if you look at a sports a stadium, a Super Bowl or a championship game, and a national convention, for over here we have these conventions for the Democratic Republican parties. Yeah. And it's the same mentality, with funny hats and banners and
thought-stuffing exercises. Blue. Yeah, that whole thing. I mean, it's nonsense. Like, it's absolutely nonsense. I did a bit recently on a DVD that I've got. It talks about political speeches.
Is that Cell?
Welcome to Cell. Yeah. Basically, it doesn't matter what you say. If you talk kind of like this, in some ways aping great orators like Martin Luther King, repeating some things because that gives the impression that they mean something. It's the tone of your voice. You can carry an entire audience like on the flow of it. And you don't say anything, you build to a crescendo, and then every time basically you say something that requires any thought, you start some applause, or you get a chant going, so that people don't have a chance to go, hang on, what did he just say? Well, that's impossible, isn't it? No, well, sorry, we're clapping now, are we? Oh, right, okay, fair enough. And that's how it works. It's sweeping people up, and then allowing people to put their own meaning on it as well. Change we can believe in. What does that? It doesn't mean anything. It literally doesn't mean anything. Like, I mean, even if we come to a consensus of like what you mean by change doesn't mean what they mean by change. It's an advertising trick. Mm-hmm. It's basically, this product will help solve whatever problem you've got. Well, what does that mean? I mean, if I pass you a brick, I've helped build that house, but I've not really done that much towards it. I implied that I would, do the majority of the work. But that's not what I meant by the word.
Mm-hmm. Well, getting back to the theme of your first book, mm-hmm. Mind Control. Spell out the evidence. I know here we have in the late 50s and 60s, we have some of the more lurid stories of mind control as the Manchurian Candidate. No doubt there's an effort to do that. Yeah. But there's also, we see elements of that with Lee Harvey Oswald. We have oddly
Mark
enough,
Chapman, Sirhan. Yeah.
Lawrence Harvey playing, the Manchurian Candidate, and then you have Lee Harvey Oswald. I always thought that was a strange coincidence in the movie The Manchurian Candidate, which is released right around the time of the Kennedy assassination, then pulled from the market because of it by Frank Sinatra, from what I understand.
Yeah, it's a great personal expense to him. Although this is another thing that's later denied, and.
But you have this, obviously through trauma-based mind control, through these various methods, you can produce what they call Manchurian Candidate, sort of a patsy. You can go out and maybe shoot off a gun and then be the fall guy, which seems to be the case in some of these incidences. First, let's get into the idea of the Manchurian Candidate.
Sure.
And explain that process. How did they construct those guys?
Well, I mean, there's various different ways of doing it. People like George Estabrooks and J.G. Watkins and Morse Allen were using hypnosis, and this was to do sort of variant tasks. So one of the things was called hypnoprogramming, which is basically I need to get a message to you, Tim. So basically, I get Soldier in, I give him a code word and put him into trance or whatever, and I tell him like all this secret information, and then I get him out of trance and say, all right, Soldier, your mission's to go over to America and speak to Tim, and that's all he knows. So he goes over to America, sees you give him the code word or whatever, unlock the information, he spits it out verbatim. You then basically put him back into, take him back out of trance. Go, cheers, mate. Thanks a lot for that. Off you go back to England. And in theory, or according to the documentation, this soldier would not only not know the information that he'd passed, he'd also not realise that he'd been hypnotised. Now, you could also put in certain flips like that. Now, say if I wanted to sort of get some information about you, Tim, right, what I could do is I could send that guy over there, and whilst he's relaying the information to you, I could have put in another program whereby basically he's taking in all the information photographically from your office. And then basically when he comes back, I can get that information, and then I could find out, something about you, whether you've got secret plans on your desk or anything like that. Do you know what I mean? So there are various sort of applications with hypnosis. J.G. Watkins and Morse Allen were more interested in making people attack, making people plant bombs or steal confidential papers or reveal secrets or shoot guns at people, and all of these things were actually achieved according to the information via hypnosis. Now, I'm a hypnotherapist myself, and I'll tell you right now, I couldn't do any of those things. There's no way that anybody who was trained normally could do any of those things. It would require a degree of trauma and some processes that are clearly missing from the notes in order to make this work. But basically, there's several ways that you could make somebody do an action under hypnosis. You could paint it as a mundane act, i.e. they're shooting a water pistol. And so they think they're shooting a water pistol, but actually they're shooting their friend in the face. Or alternatively, you could convince them that they were in a wartime scenario or something like that, and that their friend was going to kill their family, or if they didn't kill their friend, the world would end, or something whereby the act of murder was morally justifiable. And then the third way that you could do it would basically be to instill such a level of trust in a client or patient or a victim or whatever you'd like to call them, that they would go along with whatever you said, safe in the knowledge that you would never do anything to actually hurt them. Like if you say, go on and drive your car over that cliff. Now, they assume they're going to die, but they also know that you care about them too much to let them die. So they'll do that, assuming that at the last minute you'll save them somehow or whatever. And so that's a nefarious way that you could do that. I mean, it was combined with drugs to make it more effective, and later it was combined with machinery, implants to physically control either the muscle spasms of people, or to interfere with the electronic signals or the brainwave patterns of people in order to affect emotion and to actually affect physicality. I mean, there were numerous. There were certain applications in Subproject 62, for example, that looked like they were looking to remote control people, put in mechanisms whereby somebody was literally remote controlled, and they did this with certain animals like cats and dogs and dolphins and sort of things. But there were certain declassified documents that suggest that this also was going to be experimented on with humans. And then also you're getting people like Ewan Cameron and William Sargent, who are incredibly prestigious medical doctors involved with the sort of highest levels of psychiatry in America and Canada and England. And they're offering their services as like a therapeutic way of getting rid of like depression and such like that. But actually they're experimenting on how to wipe people's memory and then implant a completely new personality in these people. So there's numerous ways that this has basically been done. People like Thomas Narut, who was a member of the armed forces, accidentally spilled the beans on a project that he was involved for the Navy that was taking place in Italy, whereby basically, have you like in Clockwork Orange, they basically just stick people in front of really, really violent imagery for like days and days and days on end, and they combine this with like white noise and drugs and certain other things. And basically what he said was it turned these people into killers, like complete total killers, people that would have no moral qualms about gunning down an entire school and just getting on with it basically. And they programmed in like a complete hatred of anyone that wasn't like a massive xenophobic hatred or combined with like a completely over the top patriotism. And just basically just destroyed these people's moral boundaries so that they would, they could and would kill on command. Was the quote that came from Thomas Narut, basically.
It's sort of like a psychological boot camp.
Yeah, exactly. But
breaking down.
I mean, essentially that's what boot camp is anyway. That's why you have to stab a bayonet into a sack of straw. Because you need to learn to do these terrible things. It's not a sort of a natural it's not a natural response to sort of hurt people. I mean, that you still see that despite sort of boot camp training and or the racist indoctrination and that sort of thing. You still see people firing high on a battlefield, and deserting and all sorts of things like that because it's not a nice thing to do.
Well, yeah, it's counterintuitive to what people think of as being decent. Well, war is destruction, and human beings by nature don't want to destroy; they want to build. So you got to reverse that process through trauma, propaganda, and various methods. You mentioned Ewan Cameron. He's an interesting figure because he was a very prominent figure. He was more or less at the top of the heap of the psychiatric community.
Yeah.
And
he was
Alan Moore Institute was the beneficiary of the Human Ecology Fund, which was this front for CIA, right? And
absolutely. Yeah, the Human Ecology Fund was a slush fund that was basically allowed them to, pay people to do experimentation. I mean, sure, there were other delineations of cash as well, but basically that was the most clear one, basically. So, but yeah, Ewan Cameron was the head of the Canadian American. No, I don't think he was the head of the British, but he was certainly Canadian and American psychiatric associations. And the same thing was like William Sargent, he was very, very highly thought of, but was also an MI6 agent doing work. Him and Ewan Cameron's work was almost identical. But what's strange was that William Sargent basically wrote a letter to Ewan Cameron saying, praising him on his results, but basically chastising him, saying, whatever you think of you, and I thought of it first.
And of course, these people are given certain blandishments. Like, for example, is the psychiatric community itself was considered kind of the lower rung of the medical field.
Yeah.
So if you throw cash at them, give them false prestige, they'll leap at it and become willing participants in this program because otherwise they'd have to find more honest work.
Well, quite. I mean, the argument is that, depending on who you're talking about, they felt that they were doing this for the greater good or whatever. I mean, this is why you get certain people. I mean, for example, that's how a lot of the papers about MK Ultra came out, was due to the death of Frank Olson, who was a biochemist that was working on sort of aerosolizing LSD and aerosolizing other things, like perhaps anthrax, just like they suggested was happening in the Korean War. And he apparently witnessed an unsuccessful mind control experiment on some captured prisoners of war or military prisoners, basically. And when it was unsuccessful, these people were taken around the back of the building, told to dig their own graves, and then one by one shot in the back of the head. And this basically just completely unsettled him. He was like, I don't want to be involved in this, which led to Sidney Gottlieb dosing him with a huge dose of LSD, which ultimately led to his psychological befuddlement before George Hunter White threw him out of a window.
And Sidney Gottlieb was the principal figure. He headed the technical services branch of the CIA, which kind of like oversaw the MK Ultra program, which we need to say was sort of like a broad program, which hundreds of sub-projects.
Yeah, I mean, MK Ultra is like the umbrella term, basically. Yeah. There's 149 sub-projects that we know of, but then there's obviously these suggestions that there were further things like Monarch and stuff like that were sort of tacitly admitted to later. I forget the journalist, but basically asked, I think it was William Colby, if Monarch was still going on. Which is, presidential model. That's what it supposedly is. Prostitutes and, spies controlled women. Mm-hmm. And Colby turned around and said, no, we stopped all that in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
Which quite, take from that what you will. It's obviously, it's not smoking gun or anything, but it's suspicious.
And George Hunter White was technically, I think, an agent for the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, but he was really a CIA asset.
Yeah, I mean, he was working with Harry Anslinger as well. Yeah. I mean, like at St. Elizabeth's Hospital, basically, it's very strange that they were sort of doing their experiments to test the safety of drugs at the same places where they were doing the MK Ultra tests and stuff like that.
Yeah, it overlaps.
Yeah, Harry Anslinger was obviously the first drug czar, and
he was the one who started the reefer madness craze. And
exactly. And a lot of that was to do with demonizing Mexicans, like helping corporate interests of people like Randolph Hearst and stuff like that. But also,
that was you marginalize hemp, and at the same time you create a lucrative black market that the CIA uses to fund its operations.
Exactly. Well, that was my second point. Was that then you can also you criminalize a whole swathe of people. There's that Jolly West. Again, I can't remember the exact gist of it, but basically,
do you have that quote available? He has a great quote about.
I've not got it right here. Let me see if I can find it again, actually. But basically, the gist of it is that by the use of certain introduction or criminalization of drugs, you can quite easily, demonize certain members of society. Basically, so I've got. Oh, hang on, I might have it right here. The role of drugs in the exercise of political control is also coming under increasing discussion. Control can be through prohibition or supply. The total or even partial prohibition of drugs gives the government considerable leverage for other types of control. An application would be the selective application of drug laws against selected components of the population, such as members of certain minority groups or political organisations. And this was certainly shown in the COINTELPRO, which is FBI, to demonise certainly like groups like the Black Panthers and leftist parties and anti-war movement and stuff like that. And I believe, again, that's what John Potash's new book is about, how it's also used to sort of stymie politically active musicians or artists and that sort of thing, and basically just paint them as a junkie or as a wastrel. And this was, in my view, regardless of the actuality of the hippie movement, I think that was the sort of the concept of the introduction of the human potential movement and certain things like that.
Mysticism, New Age stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And regardless of, say, the facts of it, the point is the first people that use a word to describe hippie, and the first two that people will go is dirty or druggy or long-haired or jobless, or there's nothing positive that comes from sort of like conservative middle America when describing this concept of a hippie. Now that's a construct. It's not true. There were wonderful elements of it, but it neutralizes them as a legitimate political force, basically.
Yeah, and the what you had there was sort of a dialectic going process there, whereas you have Nixon's campaign of the silent majority and the Southern strategy and all this stuff, and they were appealing to, I would say that obviously put yourself in the shoes of a middle-aged American going to work, raising family, trying to lead a decent life,
Reagan
and also
Southern strategy as well.
Exactly, and I was a part of that because I grew up as kind of a Reagan diaper baby, you could say. I came of age in the '80s, rather a fan of Ronald Reagan. some of his utterances and his
You
politics.
were immersed in the environment. What could you do?
And I do realize you were more or less being played by the myth of electoral politics. And,
Yeah, absolutely.
And
again, that's a vicarious way. I mean, South Park did a very clever episode about that. It's like it's a vicarious win. It's a way of feeling like you've done, like that you've achieved something, and that you're going to sort of like eat scraps off the table, so to speak. It's very clever the way that they manipulate people.
You have a dog in a fight, and you have a champion fighting for you, as opposed to being completely out of the game. You're not really part of the club.
Yeah. There's a big club, and you're not in it.
Well, that's the myth of democracy, I guess you could say. It's the whole point of electoral politics. But you mentioned Jolly West. It's funny because he was the psychologist who interviewed Lee Harvey Oswald's assassin, Jack Ruby, right?
Yeah. He was convinced that Jack Ruby accidentally killed Lee Harvey Oswald whilst in the fits of a particularly violent epileptic throw.
And, of course, he also interviewed Sirhan, correct?
Yeah.
And there's some reports that he also interviewed Timothy McVeigh.
I wouldn't be surprised at all.
Wouldn't be surprised by that, yeah.
He also, once whilst on LSD, killed an elephant with a massive dose of LSD, and then, whilst tripping wildly, demanded that the audience stay there whilst he performed the autopsy. And so basically just cut this elephant's stomach open and started wading around in its organs for, he was good. The other thing that Jolly West was proposed, which never got actually put through, was as a centre for the study of violent behaviour, which was, that's all sorts of terrifying dystopic, a way to basically control the violent thoughts of man. And it's like, again, it was painted as a look, this will be good, but it's just a bit too close to sort of mind control eugenics for most people, so that didn't actually sort of go through. But these are the areas that he was concerned about. He lived in the Haight-Ashbury, Jolly West, during the Summer of Love, so that he could study the hippie in its natural environment.
And of course, Haight-Ashbury is where the Central Intelligence Agency, largely with the work of George Hunter White, was seeded with LSD, with cheap or free LSD.
I get the impression that people like Owsley Stanley. I mean, Owsley Stanley came from a military background, came from a military family, went to a military high school, voluntarily checked himself into St. Elizabeth's for, I believe it was a year, but I could be wrong about that, he sectioned himself, essentially, in an MK Ultra mind control program hospital. And then, attaches himself to the Grateful Dead, who FBI documents state were CIA assets there to sort of direct the youth away from politicization towards mysticism. And, he's handing out thousands, like $40,000, $50,000, and $60,000 worth of free LSD at shows like, the Being Festival and Monsieur Pop Festival and various other Altamont and stuff like that. And he's giving away literally millions of dollars. Like, where's he getting the funding for this? He's wandering around with like 300,000 doses of LSD in a suitcase, and when he's caught, he's managed to play this off as it's for personal use. Like, it's ridiculous. Like, Al Hubbard, I get the impression. Oh well, he was OSS. Captain Trips. And all of these sort of so-called Michael Hollingshead was an MI6 agent. He was responsible for getting the Beatles and Roman Polanski and various other people. Apparently, even the Pope he claimed to have. That was Al Hubbard claimed to have given the Pope LSD. But he was also involved with Timothy Leary and the financing of that. Timothy Leary was with the Mellon Hitchcock estate. Connections to the Weather Underground. I'm very suspicious about the Weather Underground and the splitting of the student movement and such like that, and again the demonizing through violent action of any leftist organization. It was also, again, Bernardine Van Doren that politicized the Manson case. Like, the Manson case was a grubby little drug murder until Bernardine Van Doren started proclaiming 1969 to be the year of the fork and saying that what the Manson family, in inverted commas, did was a revolutionary action.
That was the fork that was implanted into the belly of Sharon Tate.
Of Leo Bianca, but yeah, the fork that was stuck in his belly. I mean,
okay, he was also,
okay. Yeah, he was also a mafia, possibly a mafia hitman, but
Yeah,
certainly
that was another angle
in
to
depth.
his murder. That follows
Yeah,
where
he
it
was
could have
in
been a
debt
drug
to Frank
burn, a hit.
Costello.
Yeah, because he was he worked for a bank that had connections to drug running and all that. So, which all banks do.
Absolutely, and apparently Rosemary LaBianca was an LSD dealer as well. So apparently she was the person that was supplying Sebring with his LSD,
Yeah.
which he would then sell on. So there's lots of weird ins and outs to that particular case. Say connections to the Manchurian Candidate. Both Angela Lansbury's kids are in the Manson family.
Yeah, and Christian, she was in the Manchurian Candidate.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and Sinatra was on the death list apparently, and the Manson family knew Sinatra's daughter,
And Christian,
and they also knew Dina Martin. They knew Dina Martin as well, and sold drugs to Dean Martin.
Wow, yeah, and of course the Mansons is a typical example of this organization that had like unaccounted for funds. They had dune buggies and radio equipment, communication equipment, walkie-talkies.
I mean, I get the impression that a lot of their funds came from drug peddling, moving to various organisations, which is why they were constantly going up and down the coast, and then to Texas, and then up and down the coast, and then to Mexico, and then up and down the coast, and then to, if you look at the movements, I think that they're fundamentally, it was moving drugs and pimping the girls. You forget, Charles Manson was an accomplished pimp, and when he was had 3-Star Enterprises, which was going in the 50s, his partner was in the mafia. So and then he got caught moving cars interstate, and then in interviews he says that whilst he was in Mexico, on the lam, he was moving cocaine around for various mafia entities. So strange.
Wasn't he also in prison in Vacaville, which was implicated in MK Ultra?
He was, yeah. That was after he was caught, basically. That's
Okay.
when he started doing the different interviews and stuff like that. But yeah, again, he was in with Frank Costello. Was one of the people that he, which was a very, the Prime Minister of the Underworld. Apparently, he was had certain connections with him, and through the Rolling Stones road manager, whose name's just escaped me. They also got certain. Mickey Cohen sponsored clubs. They got gigs in certain clubs like that, basically. So, yeah, it's all rather strange.
And Mickey Cohen was the big mobster in Los Angeles, Hollywood.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Who sponsored Marilyn Monroe and things like.
Yeah, I mean, the inception. Frank Sinatra was vital for the inception of Las Vegas, basically. The mafia basically promoting it as a place to go, because it was Cuba, obviously. That was where all the gambling enterprises were set up.
Mm-hmm.
Then, unfortunately, that all sort of went a bit downhill because Batista was overthrown and such like that.
Yeah.
So they moved their operations to Las Vegas, and the way that this was made to be successful was with Frank Sinatra, basically. He was the go-to guy. He dragged people there as an entertainment prospect, basically. Just trying to find the.
It was Paul Helliwell, who was the CIA lawyer who set up, in the Bahamas, the Castle Bank. Which I think handled some of the Vatican Bank's money, because the Vatican Bank was implicated in all this stuff too.
Oh, I wouldn't be surprised at all.
Yeah, which might involve the alleged assassination of John Paul I in 1978.
Ah, right, yeah, and
because he was looking into that, some of the intrigues of the Vatican Bank. But get back into the mind control issue, because we're running out of time here. Again, we're dealing with the Manchurian Candidate, this sort of idea of whether it's the patsy, the assassin, or the courier, or the sex slave. All these could have factored into the creation of these people, because obviously, entrapment, blackmail, sexual blackmail, particularly with the intelligence agencies. We see it today with the Epstein case, and with the Franklin scandal, which maybe were example of intelligence agencies running these operations in order to co-opt or undermine politicians. But you also have, I don't know if you're familiar with Jan Irvin at Gnostic Media.
Yeah, I've seen some of his stuff, yeah.
And his research regarding the manufacturing of the deadhead, which I think you're alluding to here, is the Peggy, Mel, and Hitchcock family sponsoring the Grateful Dead and using her, giving her mansion over to LSD parties and things like that. And this speaks to maybe something less lurid but more ambitious would be the drugging of society, co-opting society with drugs. You want to get into that a little bit?
Well, I mean, that's certainly. I mean, There's a lot of debate as to whether that was the point of LSD, and various factions will argue for one point or another. Like in a Brave.
Hello?
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 Hi, Tim. Sorry.
I'm sorry, we broke off.
No worries. These things happen. Right. Shall I just carry on?
Yeah, let's see what we got here. Let's see, make sure. My screen went here. Let's see if I'm still recording. Yeah, we're still recording. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Cool.
We're talking about LSD, and it's sort of try to opiate the masses. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly there's debate as to how successful that was, and there's strong arguments on both sides. I think psychedelic music, certain expansions of the mind and stuff like that. There are positives that we take from LSD as well, but I don't think it was as straightforward as that. I don't think it's as simplistic as LSD. LSD, I think, was a part of it. Like, I mean, certainly there are numerous LSD casualties. And as we sort of briefly touched on before, the use of LSD to a certain degree can negate your opinion, because there's a certain element of people that will turn around and go, oh, who cares what you thought when you were on drugs, which is connected to the sort of the demonization thing that we were talking about earlier. I mean, what's certainly true is that we have a drugging of society at the minute. You've got huge amounts of people on massive amounts of dangerous and stultifying prescription medications.
Various SSRIs, yeah.
Yeah, not just that. Opiates, Oxycontin, Xanax, Vicodins. Xanax isn't technically an opiate, but or at least I don't think it is. But there's lots of socially acceptable. This is the thing. This is about social acceptance, basically. I'd suggest that people are drugged at the minute by social media and phones. Like, try walking down the street. Like, play a drinking game. Have a hip flask, right? Okay, and take a swig every time that you see somebody just staring blindly into the phone, right? Okay, I guarantee you'll be blotto before you get to the bus. Like, it's just. It's nuts. Like, but again, it's about all of these concepts: drugging of society, xenophobia, political rallies. It's about what is an accepted norm. It's about the manufacturing or the engineering of consent, which is basically people denoting them, giving them back to people, so that this is how they understand the world. This is how they see themselves in the world and how they can position in it. And everything from advertising to cult membership to political parties to the promotion of war bases itself on that principle. It's saying to the recipient of that information, this informs your worldview. I don't know. I assume it's region 2. So if you're outside of the UK, you might have to watch it on a laptop or a multi-region DVD.
Yeah,
but I assume everybody's got those nowadays because,
it's all part of mind control.
Well, yeah, you've got to. Otherwise, how will you see the next Transformers film?
Exactly. Well, listen, thank you so much. Again, maybe we'll talk in the future soon and get into these things.
Yeah, I'd love to come back.